Hey guys, and welcome to episode 101 of the OCDstories.com podcast. Now in this episode I chat with Dr. Ashley Smith. She is a psychologist and therapist based in Kansas in the United States. And we discussed some of the biggest challenge she sees in therapy with her clients, what her successful clients, that is those that recover quicker, have in common, or their kind of mindsets to therapy. That was really interesting. How her approach to therapy or treating OCD has changed over the last 10 years. That was also good to hear. We talk about positive psychology and how Ashley integrates that into her sessions. We talk a bit about advice for parents of kids with OCD. And then we talk about her own story. She is legally blind. So we talk about her journey with that, overcoming shame, which I think a lot of people with any kind of mental health condition will relate to, and we talk about her year of new experiences, which is a challenge she set herself, and then towards the end a lot about personal development, self-help, and how that's helped us both through the years. So I think you'll really enjoy this episode, so here she is. On today's podcast I have Dr. Ashley Smith. Ashley has a PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. She worked as a staff psychologist at a children's hospital and an anxiety specialty centre for a combined 10 years before going into private practice. Ashley recently wrote her first book, Childhood Anxiety Disorders. Inspired by her own difficulties, she launched blindquest.com, a blog about creating lasting happiness regardless of perceived limitations. Welcome to the show, Ashley.
Thanks so much, Stu. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, likewise. Good to have you on, and thank you to Charla for introducing us both.
Definitely.
Excellent. So Charla's a veteran on this show now. I think she's been on 3 or 4 times.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what I always do is get the person's story, whether that's an OCD story or a therapy story, so why you got into therapy, and also a little bit around, I guess, the nature behind the blog, why you created that.
Okay, well, on the professional side, I honestly sort of stumbled into working with anxiety disorders. So majored in psychology because it was interesting and I didn't fall asleep reading the textbook. Okay, so then from there it was, all right, if you want to do anything with psychology, you have to go to graduate school. So I went into a clinical psychology program and trained under an advisor who did adolescent social anxiety work. And so that's how I kind of got into the anxiety world. And I loved it because it makes sense. Yeah. What I love about working with all of the anxiety disorders is it's almost like cracking a code. So once you know like how OCD works or any other kind of anxiety disorder, then you know what to do about it. And I liked that. And it made sense to me that there was this clear rationale for treatment. So it's not just show up and talk about how your week went, but these really kind of targeted, cool, scientifically based strategies to help train your brain. And so from there, I ended up working at Omaha Children's Hospital. I got hired to help build their anxiety services. And as part of that was consulting with one of the nationally recognized anxiety centers in the U.S. in Kansas City. And that sort of led to me leaving Omaha and joining their staff. And along the way, really got immersed in the OCD treatment world. And again, I love it because here's this treatment. We know it tends to work. And what I love about working with individuals with OCD, whether we're talking kids or adults, is these are cool people, bright, creative, empathic, fantastic memories. And I think all of those things are qualities that tend to go along with an OCD brain, and then you just kind of have to learn how to wrangle it. And I think that's fantastic. And what I like is seeing people get better. I'm still, what is this, 15 years into exposure work, and I still get so excited when I see people being brave and conquering their fears and kind of getting through that to the other side. Yeah. I'm genuinely tickled every time. And that's why I do what I do professionally. And then with part of that, so with cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT, and exposure with response prevention falls under that umbrella. So does acceptance and commitment therapy or ACT. I live and breathe that stuff. Like one of the best side effects of my job is that I have really awesome coping skills and I practice what I preach. And I've always said CBT is not rocket science. And I think everybody would benefit from it, whether you have OCD or not. there are some just cool principles that I think make life better.
Yeah.
And on the personal side, I'm legally blind, and I always have been, but for a long time it wasn't that impactful in my day-to-day life, so I could hide it. So
Yeah.
people didn't know, close friends didn't know, people who've known me for years, my patients certainly didn't know. And then it took a turn for the worse and declined significantly. I had to stop driving. I have a hard time seeing people's faces from more than just a few feet away. And it got to the point where I had to start being more open with patients. If I, walk out to the waiting room and look like I don't see you, see me and come on back and here's what's going on. And for me, that was kind of a personal low point, and I was kind of riddled with uncertainty, which is something that few people with OCD can really relate to. So I'm in this place of doctors can't tell me what's going on. They can't tell me what to do about it. They can't tell me if it's going to get worse. They promised me it was going to stay the same, and very clearly were wrong. So that left me in this place of feeling just really stuck and down, and realizing, well, this is a pretty miserable way to go through life, and I don't want to continue to do this. So that kind of started me on this personal journey of, all right, well, how do I move forward, and how do I build this life that I really enjoy, and how do I find happiness with a disability and with this uncertainty? And fortunately, as I mentioned, I've got good coping skills from CBT, but that kind of putting both of those pieces together really kind of pushed me toward this positive psychology direction too. And positive psychology is this basically the study and pursuit of more of the good.
Yeah.
How do we build happiness, resiliency, find joy, and not just kind of bring people who are sort of under up to baseline, but how do we take everybody and maximize life? And I think whether you're dealing with OCD or vision loss or some other disability, it's, well, what's the point unless you're getting your symptoms under control, unless you're also moving forward with this life and making the most of it. So that is a really long answer to your what do I do and why do I do it question.
No, it's good. Thank you. And you gave loads of detail. And don't worry, I've had people go on for much longer.
Okay.
So it was good. That was good. So yeah, later on, I've got some questions around, yourself being legally blind and how you've kind of dealt with that in terms of making the most of it and, pursuing happiness regardless. And also some more on positive psychology and maybe one or two on ACT, which I haven't written down. But now that you say you're a fan of it, I'll probably try and freestyle on that.
Sure.
But to start with, focus more on traditional sort of ERP-based questions. Actually, I guess you can throw any of it in, but the first one would be, what are some of the biggest challenges in therapy you see with your clients with OCD? I guess to define that better is the kind of the things that stop them. Is there anything common in that you see that holds people back?
Yeah, there are a few things that come up and kind of get in people's way. One, the reality is, at least in the US, it's difficult to find OCD therapists, to find people who really get it. So the average person with OCD, one, sees multiple providers before they're accurately diagnosed. They see multiple providers before they get someone who knows what OCD is. And so a lot of times from the first session with my patients, my goal is, one, to do a good assessment so that I can plan treatment, but also to build hope and trust. And usually people will say by the end of the appointment, they're like, wow, you get it. And I say, I know. And I think that's incredibly important and a barrier. So finding someone who gets OCD and who isn't going to inadvertently provide reassurance or encourage rituals. I had a kid once who, she saw her well-meaning psychiatrist and she said, I'm having some trouble with my OCD and, he's telling me not to touch stuff anymore because I'm going to get contaminated. And the psychiatrist says, well, it's okay. Why don't you just wear gloves for a little while? And so we're cringing. It's like, oh no, we want to boss it back. We don't want to ritualize. And so that's a huge barrier, finding someone who gets it. When you do, there's wait lists and then there's usually costs, limitations. And At least in my area, most of the OCD specialists don't take insurance. So that means it's an out-of-pocket investment. And I would encourage people to look at it as an investment. It's a short-term treatment where you're going to learn the tools. We're going to train you to be your own therapist so that you can, whether you're 13 or 93, once you learn ERP, you can do it. So it's worth the investment. Now, in terms of when we kind of put those practical things aside, the things that really get in the way of people doing treatment and doing their exposures, I think one, there's fear. I talk about OCD being this separate entity, so I really like this framework of bossing it back, and OCD is going to use fear.
Yep.
It's hard. It's so hard to override, neurobiology and everything that's going on when every fiber in your being is saying, don't do that. It's danger. And then the rational side and your therapist is saying, yeah, we'll do it. This is going to help. That's just physically difficult. So that's a barrier. But the other piece is, I think, excuses. Our brains are so good at excuses. Like, oh, don't do it. It's just one little ritual.
Yeah.
Oh, 2 seconds. You don't have time for this nonsense right now. So looking out for those excuses. And I think we can't, over the years as I've done this, I think there's ERP in really pursuing that. But I think a critical piece of treatment is also learning how to boost your motivation and find that energy and that willingness to kind of dig deep and push. Because when those voices are, you can't do it, it's too hard, it's not going to make a difference, those get in the way. And so those kinds of thoughts really become barriers themselves, especially if you've kind of rocked ERP and then you're having a relapse. Those thoughts, oh my gosh, I'm back to square one, that gets in the way. So helping people find ways to stay pumped, to find their reasons why, and to kind of overcome those you can'ts, it's not going to work voices. I think those are barriers that are really critical to overcome.
Yeah, no, thank you. That was a good explanation. And maybe this is the same question, but on the different side of the coin, which is, are there a few things that all your most successful clients have in common? When I say successful, I mean successful in treatment. Kind of, yeah, is there anything in common as to how they approach therapy, as to why they succeed, or when I say succeed, just recover quicker?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I think back over probably the most successful cases or, situations, there's kind of this, they get it. So this sort of being able to separate themselves from OCD and understand kind of the model of how it works, that seems to be really important. And that's why I think education is critical. And this is not my metaphor. I took it from Dr. Marty Franklin, who's an OCD expert and a guru. But I teach people, whether we're talking kids or adults, this whole feed the dog explanation of, like, imagine that a dog's coming up begging for food and you're like, oh, one little bite won't hurt. You give it a bite, it's happy, it runs off. The next day, here it comes. Well, now it wants 2 bites and then it goes off and it keeps going on and on and on until it's eaten all your food. And you just said, well, this isn't okay. So what do? Like, you can't reason with the dog, right? You can't say, no, go eat your dog food, I'm having pizza. You have to stop feeding it. And then if you stop feeding it, the dog is going to bark and beg and whine and scratch. And if you feed it, then it's going to keep coming back. But if you stay strong, eventually it's going to give up. It's going to leave you alone. Yeah. And OCD is like that dog, only it pitches a fit with scary thoughts and scary feelings in your body. So when people when they kind of understand and they're able to think about it in those kind of reinforcement feed the dog terms, they're going to do well. Because it makes sense, right? Like, here's why we're going to do ERP. There's also a degree of kind of willingness and motivation. So when they can adopt that mindset, I don't know, I mean, in all these years, I haven't quite figured out how to make this switch happen, but everyone I've ever worked with who's been successful at some point switches from, oh my gosh, I have to do this exposure. Okay, I'll do it. They're like gritting their teeth to get through it, to, all right, what else can I do to tick off OCD? Yeah. So this sort of embracement of anxiety and discomfort, to still challenge us where it's for the greater good. Yeah. But when they make that switch to, I want this anxiety, it's going to make me stronger, I know they're going to be fine. And so I preach that from the beginning, but it clicks for people. That's critical. I I think those are kind of and then honestly, like consistency is key. The ones who do the best are the ones who are consistent with their exposures. It's just like getting fit at the gym.
Anything in life, right? Consistency
Right.
is key. Yeah.
Exactly. So you got to put in the work. But those who do it.
Yeah. So I guess touching on your other points, kind of those clients that eventually switch and instead of, to use a sporting term, that a lot of people are on defense, and then the ones that do better are the ones that go on offense and say, let me find those exposures, let me push my anxiety higher, let me do all this. And I guess when you're in that mode, yes, you may be pushing anxiety higher, but you're also more confident because you're the aggressor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it takes the power away from OCD, right? Like a lot of people can do their exposures and they kind of get to this point. Like I almost think of it as like in the beginning, you're leaning away from OCD and it's crowding into your space and you're kind of like, please go away, please go away. And I really like to get people to the point where they're leaning into OCD space, like being the aggressor with it.
Yeah.
But a lot of people want to kind of stop in this middle ground of like, I'm not willing to really push it, but I'll try to stay strong and not let it push me around. And I think it's hard to maintain that because it's just easy to start to slip. So
yeah, I agree. Yeah, absolutely. But like you said, it's kind of people almost need to make that decision themselves, right? And say, I'm now going to be the bully, for want of a better word, then OCD be the bully.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. So this question is, how has your approach to treating OCD changed over the last 10 years, if it has? That is.
It has actually. And that's also a cool question. That's something, so I do, I'm in private practice now, but I like working as a team. So I have a couple of people that OCD specialists that we consult every couple of weeks. And we've talked about this a lot as we've been kind of veterans in this field of OCD. What's changed? For me, I started out very much hardcore traditional ERP. And with that, it was based on what we call a habituation model. So that's graduated exposure till you get used to it. So if we go from like a 0 to 10 scale, we're going to start in that 4 or 5 range and tackle exposures there till you habituate or get used to it. So when anxiety comes down by about 50%, your exposure is over. And then when you consistently do that and you kind of get used to it, so that particular target's not really triggering for you anymore, then we move our way up the ladder. And I took a very kind of behavioral, this is just what we're going to do it, kind of here's the process, push through. Over the years, as ACT has gained some traction, initially when it first started really getting a lot of talk, I was in the camp of ERP, ACT, it's all the same thing, right? Here's the ERP is you're anxious, so what, do it anyways. And ACT is you're anxious, so what, do your important stuff anyways.
Yeah.
Over the years, more recently, my approach has shifted a little bit in terms of embracing a little bit more of like that mindfulness. And I really see mindfulness and values work as going hand in hand with ERP. So rather than just here's the ERP, here's the science behind it, let's get you motivated and do it, there's also this, and let's pull in mindfulness. Let's train your brain to be more present. Those go hand in hand. Let's take the judgments out. Yes, it is what it is. This thought is what it is. If it's not good or bad, I don't have to get rid of it. I can just allow it to be. Sounds a lot like exposure to me. And pulling in your values, like why are you doing these things? And I think that helps with motivation. So that's shifted a little bit over the years, and just the concrete approach to exposure has shifted a little bit for me. So I still build hierarchies with some people, and sometimes we still take that graduated approach and we get used to it. And for others, if they're able to just kind of embrace this model, more like Dr. Reed Wilson of, you versus OCD, go get your points and tackle it. Some people are able to do that. And so if they're able to, I go more that route. And that's been a shift for me. And the other piece, I don't know how much your audience uses the term scripting, but that's part of ERP.
Yeah.
For me, it's not just behaviorally, what are we doing for exposures, but also what are you doing with your mind, right? If your mind is thinking all of the time, we don't want to inadvertently do mental rituals. Like I'm touching something that's contaminated. There's my exposure, but in my head, I'm going, I'm fine, I'm fine,
Yeah.
I'm fine. That's not working, right? So, and I've changed kind of how I've done scripting over the years from more of a kind of chew on the scary thought till it loses flavor, which sounds a lot like diffusion and
Yeah.
act. So I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die till it sounds boring. Done the sitting with uncertainty. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. I'll never know. And then for some people, I do more of the just they're almost like a mantra, like I want this anxiety. I want this anxiety. So trying to kind of facilitate that, bring it on,
Yeah.
and I can handle this. So those have been kind of some shifts over the years. Conceptually, it's all still the same.
Yeah.
Like, I really think it's if you have a thought and you act on it, you will have more thoughts. Like that's the equation. Thought plus action equals more thought. So with OCD, you have an obsession, you act on it by a compulsion, obsessions increase. So we just want to kind of change that formula, if that makes sense at all.
Yeah. So thought plus inaction equals less thoughts.
Exactly. Yeah. Or thought plus opposite action, or inaction, just anything that doesn't feed it.
Yeah.
Right. If you kind of buy that thought and you act on it, you're really telling your OCD, hey, awesome job. Please keep doing that. I really like what you're spitting out.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That makes sense. And ACT is something that I've talked about a fair few times on this podcast. And I had Stephen Hayes on the show in episode 4, I believe. So he came on very early on. But so I'm a big fan of ACT. And I've always had the hypothesis that ACT and ERP go hand in hand and mutually benefit each other. And I did, for my master's degree that I finished a few months ago, I did, for my dissertation, I looked at ACT for treating OCD. All the different, there's only been literally like 10 studies on it, which is nothing at all really. And to be fair, Michael Tuhig and his colleagues, I don't know if you know Michael.
Not personally. I know his work.
But of him, yeah. So he did a systematic review sort of 4 years before I did. So my one literally just tops up his work, and it didn't add anything else to what he had already said, which was frustrating. But and there are limitations to it because there's not enough data, there's not enough randomized control trials, but the evidence looks promising.
Right.
And what I've seen, how ACT's been used by people with OCD, I've seen benefits to it. So I think there's an argument whether ACT can be used solely alone without exposure work. And I don't encourage it until there's more research. But ACT with ERP, absolutely. And Michael wrote an article combining the two, kind of hypothesizing that it should be done. So it's good to see that you're using both of them. Yeah,
and I would say I dabble in ACT. It's something professionally I'm seeking more training in, but what I know about it conceptually, it makes sense, and it fits with a decade of just in the room experience with individuals and going through this ERP process. It fits with my experience there. So I don't think you can get around exposures in terms of overcoming OCD. We got to lean into it, and that's the bulk of it. But these are some pieces to kind of augment, and I do think they go hand in hand now. So, and I think the research will bear that out with time. The research always takes time to get that.
Time and money.
Time and money, absolutely.
Soon as someone can profit from ACT, there'll be plenty of research.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great. Okay, so going on to positive psychology, which I did a short course before I went to retrain into mental health. I did a short course in positive psychology and I absolutely loved it. Also because a lot of it is based on sort of Stoic philosophy, which I love. And obviously Stoic philosophy is arguably the kind of underpinning of CBT, or that's what inspired Ellis and Beck. Okay, so the question is, what areas of positive psychology do you use in your therapy for OCD?
So with that, I'd say my kind of venturing into positive psychology started with my master's thesis, and I was doing adolescent social anxiety work and had this interest in, okay, well, how about happiness and optimism? as it relates to social anxiety and depression. And then I kind of got away from positive psychology and focused really on CBT. And it's been more in the past kind of couple of years that I've been dabbling and looking at, okay, what do we know? And getting back to that. And it's very much inspired by the values and pieces. But in terms of what have I taken from where that field of work is and incorporating, because I think it goes hand in hand with CBT. Yeah. There's some fantastic people coming out of Harvard who are looking at happiness. And when I was reading a book, it's Happier, something along the lines of like The Secret to Daily Joy and Meaningful Life. I'm butchering that title. It's a phenomenal read. As I'm going through it, I'm thinking, well, this is just CBT, but instead of being applied to anxiety or depression or anger, it's being applied to positive emotions. Great. So they're speaking my language. So in the room, I see it as it just blends very nicely, but I very consistently build in a gratitude practice. Yeah. That's probably one of the biggest things that I do that kind of falls under that traditional positive psychology. It's got a ton of data, but I also think of it as our brains are so good. They're kind of wired from this evolutionary perspective to notice the negative more. Right? Like cavemen are going to remember the things that poison them instead of the foods that were safe to eat. So we're already wired toward the negativity. OCD is looking for danger. When we're anxious, our thinking gets very kind of laser focused. And so thinking about what strategies can we use to broaden that and to kind of get off that OCD track and onto other ones. Yeah. So mindfulness has a huge body of research, and the positive psychologists, they're all advocating for mindfulness in terms of building happiness. Yeah. Well, it's also looking really effective for anxiety. So I use a lot of mindfulness now that I didn't a couple of years ago, a lot of the gratitude practice, and a lot of what traditionally we would call behavioral activation. It's a treatment for depression, but that's basically making yourself do things that are fun, theoretically enjoyable, or that give you a sense of productivity, this accomplishment. I think that's critical for OCD. If you're structuring your time and you're doing stuff that either is going to give you that sense of accomplishment, that sense of enjoyment, tie in some values there. But those are things that the more you're invested in that, the less time you have for rituals.
Absolutely. And I think, when you're stuck in your head or your kind of anxiety is flooding through your system, people tend to stop doing the things they enjoy because I need to think about this 24 hours a day or whatever it is. And then that can obviously lead to further things like depression because you're more isolated, you're not doing the things that fill you with joy. So yeah, I absolutely like the take on positive psychology of like you said, drawing your attention back now to the things that are going to be more meaningful and kind of using more of your attention there. Strengths is the other one that fascinates me about positive psychology because they do a lot of focus on people's strengths and and I always thought that it would almost be good for therapists to do like is via character or something. There's that website where you can do a strength test, which I think Martin Seligman put it together or his team or whatever, and just getting people to do that test, and then you see people's strengths. So if humor's their number one strength, try and be more funny in therapy. Or if their strength is competition, then try and make ERP based on competition in some way. You know what I mean? So tailoring the treatment to the person's strengths.
That's a brilliant idea.
I mean, I don't know if it would work, but it seems like it should be tested.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'll take your idea and try that out because that would be a really interesting way. I mean, over time, you kind of get this elusive clinical judgment where you kind of gauge, okay, here's how I need to modify my approach for this kid or this adult. But data speaks to me. So I love the idea of having more of a questionnaire and kind of a strength-based assessment and saying, here's how we're going to use this either in the treatment room and as well as, just structuring their ERP and helping them be successful with that. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, that's a really great idea.
I think the website's via, something like that. And then it's -character, I think.
Okay.
But if you Google it, it should be there. But yeah, so I mean,
Yeah.
I only know this because on that short course I did, they got us to take the test.
Uh-huh.
And actually, he gave the example, and he doesn't tailor, because this guy is a therapist as well, but he doesn't tailor his therapy. But what he said was he used to, before he trained to be a therapist, he used to work in IT, and there was this guy who never made cups of tea. So people would say, "Oh, do you want a cup of tea?" And very English, and yeah, so everyone would like take turns at making rounds of tea, but this one guy never offered. If he went up to get a cup of tea, he just made it for himself and no one else. So what they did, I don't know if he did this intentionally or it was just that he found this out, but they basically created a leaderboard on a spreadsheet, and whoever made the most rounds of tea in a month won something. And this guy started making loads of cups of tea, and he won the competition, who had never made a round for anyone. And it turns out this guy was competitive. So they to get him to kind of be more what they wanted, they just turned the table to meet his strengths.
Yeah.
And I always found that quite...
No, that's great. It's great. And I think kind of using the strengths, and then one of the other pieces that I use a lot with ERP is just the principles of operant conditioning. So using rewards and consequences to shape. And so a lot of, particularly with kids, that we almost always have a behavior plan, but it's really based on this difference of sometimes we know what to do, but knowing and doing it are two different things. I know I should go to the gym every day. Do I do it? No. Well, so people with OCD know they should do their exposures every day. Do they? No. And me shaking my finger and saying, do this, doesn't always work. So you got to find a way to kind of translate it into action. And so maybe using strengths or, and in that case, like with the competition, that raises internal motivation for some people. Or maybe they had a really cool prize and that's what motivated. So it was an external, reward he was seeking, but it translated it into behavior change, which is the critical piece.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah.
So with kids, do you do sort of sticker rewards and that type of thing?
Like similar concepts, but heavier duty, because a sticker chart doesn't usually work. Kids are like, I don't really care about a sticker. But I do. And honestly, I use it for adults too. Okay. And almost everyone that I work with, we end up having some version of a behavior plan. And I tell them I love my job, and I do, but I wouldn't do it if I didn't get paid. Yeah. I wouldn't do the paperwork if I didn't get, let's be real. So we have to find those ways to kind of help you overcome and do those things. So with kids, sometimes it's rewards. When you practice your therapy homework, you get points, and those points cash in for rewards. Or when you tackle these kind of exposure goals, or when you get to the end of treatment, we'll have an incentive. Sometimes that's not enough, especially if the more severe OCD is. Those kind of extra rewards lose their power, because kids are, okay, great, you're going to buy me a Lego set. Well, I don't really care about a Lego set. I'm freaking out about my mom dying right now, or whatever it is. So sometimes we need more immediate things, or even more consequences. And it's never, ever to punish a kid for having OCD or experiencing anxiety. But we want to use the behaviors. That's the piece they have control over, right? We have control over our behaviors, so therefore over compulsions. So that's the piece I target. So sometimes we'll do what's called the pre-MAC principle, which is essentially eat your vegetables and you get your dessert. Do your exposures, and then you can have your technology. That works pretty well. Kids are highly motivated for their screens these days. Or when I know that a kid is capable of facing OCD in a certain place, so we're in their working range, I know they can do it. And then so if they choose not to, then there might be a consequence. So if you repeatedly ask for reassurance, then you're going to end up having to do chores or something like that. Just something to kind of help boost that likelihood that when that urge kicks in, they're going to override it. Yeah. And that works tremendously well. And even in the anxiety world, I've done several presentations at anxiety conferences on this topic, but a lot of providers have a hard time with this idea. You're being mean. I'm not. I'm actually being really tough on the anxiety, and I'm helping this person get success. Because I think one of the worst things I can do is give them the message that ERP is ineffective. Yeah. And if they're not doing ERP, correctly or consistently, then of course it's not going to work. I know it's because, well, you didn't actually do it, but to the person it feels like, well, I tried and it didn't work. So I would argue that using contingencies, reinforcement, and punishment actually is a more effective treatment. It builds this sense of confidence. So we just have to get a little momentum going, and the internal motivation is going to take over. But especially when people are very, very severe or even extreme with their symptoms, I approach it as the more severe the symptoms are, the more external structure people need to help contain it. Whereas a lot of people say, oh, you're really riddled with anxiety. We're going to back off. We're not going to push you. And then OCD just grows. And I think it backfires.
Yeah, no, that's a good way of looking at it. Yeah, I like that. No, thanks for explaining that. Okay, so next question around kids again. Because I have more and more parents listening to the podcast, which I'm flattered by. And I'm training in to work with children now, so it's
wonderful.
I'm trying to ask more of these types of questions. What advice do you have for parents of kids with OCD on just how they can, I guess, support them better? As support being towards recovery.
Absolutely. One is educate yourself. You have to understand how OCD works because, especially with kids, I mean, OCD uses good parenting against you. So like good parenting 101 is do whatever it takes to make your kid feel healthy, happy, and secure. If you have an anxious kid, what do? You make them feel better. Okay, in the OCD world, that's accommodate. Yeah. That's feed the dog for them. It's going to blow up. So we have these well-meaning parents trying to do what comes naturally, actually making the symptoms worse. So proper education is critical so that you understand. And that way, I mean, honestly, I love Ellie Leibowitz's book. I think it's Treating Child and Adolescent Anxiety, a Guide for Caregivers or something to that extent. But he talks about OCD within this family context. So it's not just the kid, but it is so difficult for parents to watch their children be anxious. I remember I was working with a little kiddo, maybe 5. We're doing exposures. Mom's fully on board. I get it. That absolutely makes sense. I'm ready to push. We do the first exposure. Her kid is anxious, and I'm standing next to Mom. I can see her shaking. And she's saying, I wasn't expecting to be so anxious, but I know my kid is struggling. So the more parents know, the better. The other piece is externalize OCD. Separate it from your child, because that's going to let you be mean to OCD but supportive of your kid. I always tell families, OCD loves to kick back and make you fight amongst yourselves, because if you're fighting, no one's fighting OCD. So when parents are saying, just suck it up or accommodate, and parents tend to go from either overly accommodating to angry, or one parent is one style and one is the other, and neither is helpful for OCD. They're both natural, and I completely understand, but we want this matter of fact, that's anxiety. Let's team up to boss it back. You can do this. You can be brave. So supporting the kid to be brave, but you can't do it for them.
Yeah. And
getting angry doesn't help.
Yeah.
One of the other things that I think is really helpful for parents is being a good model. I mean, a lot of times OCD runs in families. Apple doesn't it doesn't fall far from the tree. So sometimes that can be really motivating for adults to get their own anxiety under control. But the other piece is kids don't see the 99 times out of 100 that their parents are coping well with frustrations, with fears, with whatever, because that happens internally. So sometimes even saying like, wow, I'm feeling really anxious, but I'm going to take a deep breath and I'm going to do it anyway because I know I can handle this. Like those 3 sentences model for your kid what you're doing internally, and that's helpful. They need to see how to overcome. So I think when parents share their own anxieties and their efforts to overcome, that can be tremendously helpful for kids too.
Yeah, I love that, and I think it makes it okay to feel emotion that isn't positive.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Which is important, right?
Absolutely.
Because if we give this message, you shouldn't feel anxious. Well, okay, that's not helpful.
But yeah, especially, I mean, you look at men in society, men can't cry without looking wussy, like a wussy,
Right?
or whatever negative word I want to attach to it.
Exactly.
And that's something I still have a real kind of, not, I wouldn't have, maybe fear, but it's probably not the best word. I still would extremely struggle to cry in public, even cry in my own home in front of my wife or whoever, because
Yeah.
there's some kind of conditioning. But obviously,
Societal programming, right? Like
exactly.
men cry are weak. Okay. It's not helpful and I don't think it's accurate, but it's there. It takes a lot of effort to overcome that.
Well, absolutely. So if one of my goals kind of deal with that. So if in future when I have a kid and I, for whatever reason, feel I need to cry, to be able to do that unashamedly, and be able to react differently, like it's a normal, natural emotion. I'm just cleansing kind of that emotion. I'm getting it out, and then I'm going to
Right.
continue with my day, type of thing. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's a big one for parents. It's not always
Hmm.
easy, but to try and, yeah, as you say, model not good
Yeah.
behavior. Well, good behavior, but
Coping.
good
Yeah.
emotion. Yeah.
Yeah. Show them how to handle these emotions and think about your own old programming and do you want your kids to have that or not? And I mean, it's interesting to look at this whole idea of like unintended or unspoken messages. They're in every family. We
Mm.
have our words that we say out loud, like just do your best. But then we have the unspoken messages of then when you're looking at the kids' grades and you're saying, I can't believe you missed this one. This one is so easy. You should have tried harder. What message are we giving?
Yeah.
It's not good enough unless you do perfect, right? So we have to kind of look at those unspoken messages too. And then what you're saying is really kind of putting that into practice of, well, I don't want this to be what my kids get. Like emotions aren't okay. So
Mm.
I'm going to show them that they are and how to handle them or things like that. Model making mistakes. If you don't want your kid to struggle with perfectionism, show them you doing good enough. Because
Yeah.
you can't tell your kids it's okay to make mistakes if they then see you spending hours and hours crafting the perfect email and stressing about it. Unspoken message, and that's going to speak louder.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Yeah, I guess just self-awareness is the first step on that one
That's huge. Yeah. Yeah, that's
for
huge.
anyone to kind of just acknowledge that maybe this could be picked up, or as you say, sometimes not sharing an emotion, you're not actually doing anything, but actually
Yeah.
not doing it is doing something, which is then going to be
Yeah.
perceived negatively by the child.
Exactly. The
Mm.
one other piece I would throw out for parents to kind of counter all of this is kids are amazingly resilient
Yeah.
and you're not going to do it right all of the time. And you also have to have some self compassion.
Mm.
Learn, try. Um, Kids do better when their parents can kind of be the behavior therapist at home, the exposure coach at home. And yet you're also going to miss the mark sometime. You're human, and that's okay. Because I've seen parents go down that, oh my gosh, if only I had caught this sooner, if only I had done
Mm.
that, I shouldn't have done this. And that's not helping them as individuals, and that's not going to help them be good coaches either. It's a
Yeah.
balancing act.
Absolutely. And the phrase you just said, it's one of my favorites, which is, and that's okay.
Yeah,
I think you can be applied to many areas of life. Just
so
it's
many.
okay.
Yeah.
Um, okay, great. So next question then is, so now going on to, you talked at the start about your eyesight,
Hmm.
and the trouble you've had over the years. And I remember reading on ablindquest.com. I think it was either on the about page or towards the bottom, or I can't remember where it was. Anyway, you talked about you used to really, actually you mentioned at the start of this podcast, you used to hide it a lot, and
Yeah.
I think you used the word ashamed on your website.
Yeah.
Um, and
Definitely.
obviously there's people who have OCD listening to this, no doubt have had or still have shame around OCD, and maybe even if someone's listening to don't have OCD, we've all kind of felt shame in some area of our life and hidden stuff. I
Yeah.
guess how did you kind of start to overcome that, and B, I guess how did the mind switch from feeling ashamed to saying I'm going to embrace this,
Yeah.
and try and live happy regardless?
It's been a process, and I will say this is where my exposure training has been incredibly helpful. So I, for a very long time, had this kind of core belief that I am flawed. Because
Mm.
of my vision, I am flawed. And when I would talk to close friends, people, I mean, if they didn't share that same belief, and I could recognize, like, I could kind of take a step back and say, okay, I understand why you don't believe this, but I can't logic my way out of this. I can go through everything you're telling me, but in my core, I still believe that I am flawed. And that's where the shame came from, because shame is really, to take Brene Brown's definition, it's a fear of loss of connection, that if people knew this about me, they would reject me in some way. So that's why I hid it. And then it got to a point where I couldn't fake my way through life anymore. And so I did kind of my first big public coming out as I was raising money for the Foundation Fighting Blindness and online, and I put my story out there, and it was definitely exposure. I wanted to barf, and I put it out there, and I'm scared that, that fear would come true. So it really was exposure in that true sense of, let me test this fear. People are going to reject me because I am flawed. And I put it out there, and I got positive feedback. So that was helpful. Didn't take care of it all. And then I remember I used to run a support group, a monthly support group for people who have body focused repetitive behavior disorders. Yeah. And one of the topics that always came up every month is, when do I tell people I have trichotillomania or skin picking? Or do I tell? And people were at different points in their journey there. Some were like out loud and proud, this is something I deal with, whatever. And others were so secretive, and it was all shame-based. And I remember sitting in that group, and the first time I came out and I said, well, actually, I'm legally blind, and sitting at this table, I can't actually see all of you guys clearly. And part of this, it wasn't even personal, but there's also some discomfort of just sharing my personal story professionally, because the way I was trained was like, no, as a psychologist, in your ethics, and you keep your personal stuff out of it. So people like Steve Hayes, who have been open about, having panic attacks, has been freeing for me. So, but I sat there, and like my heart is pounding and my mouth is dry, and I wanted to cry. And I'm like, keep it together, Ashley. Like, you have to model good coping skills. But long story short, putting it out there, acting as though I weren't ashamed, has really helped chip away at that belief, because I realized I can't talk my way out of believing I am flawed. But I know how it works to build belief, right? Belief plus action equals more belief. Belief plus opposite action equals less belief. So if I wanted to believe I'm not flawed, I'm fine, I'm okay, then I have to add action to that to really build it. So that's what I've started to do. And I'm now sitting here talking openly with you. I have no physiological reactivity. I'm much better about it is what it is. And that was the part of starting the blog. It was part of my personal way of saying, I'm going to put it out there. And me putting it out there doesn't fit with me wanting to be ashamed of it. And for me, that's lifted a lot of shame. And it's made it a lot easier to deal with and to cope. I'm not nearly as afraid. My future is still as uncertain as it was 2 years ago in terms of how much it's going to progress or not progress, or do I go blind or not. I'm not scared anymore. And so doing this has really helped take that shame down. It's actually helped me feel much more connected with people, because kind of keeping this part of me secret and not asking for help when I need it. Like, now I'm perfectly comfortable asking people, I can't see the menu, can you help me? I used to be terrified of that. Yeah. So it's been helpful. And then people are saying, thank you for sharing, or, hey, here's what I'm struggling with too. And so me being vulnerable gives them permission to be vulnerable. It's helped me actually feel more connected with people. And honestly, it's boosted my happiness a ton. And I think people with OCD also feel a lot of shame, either around the disorder. I mean, what we have in common is we didn't do anything to cause this. It's not our fault. And we may or may not be able to do anything about it. It's a lifelong journey, but it's just a piece of who we are. And shame, like when you asked me at the beginning, what are some of the barriers that get in the way? Shame is one. Shame keeps people from pursuing treatment, from using their social support. And that just keeps you more inside. That keeps you kind of locked in your own world. And that gives OCD way more power. Yeah. It's freeing to be able to say, wow, I'm having this thought that I should like stick my kid in the microwave. That's a horrific thought. Okay, but that's just OCD. And by the way, everybody has that thought. Or, I have to struggle. And today I can't do the things I wish I could because it's harder and you're having to work a lot harder to take care of your health.
Hmm.
It's freeing to be able to put it out there.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I completely agree. And I've said this before, and maybe it's not the best comparison, but in the film 8 Mile with Eminem,
Mm-hmm.
I love that film. He, people hate him for whatever reason. And and obviously he's doing the rap battle thing, and the whole point of a rap battle is to destroy your opponent, to embarrass them to
Right.
the point. And he gets to the point where he's so sick and tired that he starts off by completely destroying himself and putting all his perceived flaws out into the world, and then they couldn't attack him back because they had no
Right.
ammo anymore.
Yeah.
And that was a negative way of doing it, and the way you did it is much more positive because it was a values-based choice. But it's still that when it's out in the world, it loses its power because yeah,
Exactly. Yeah, I know it's another way. It's the same thing with like when you talk with kids about dealing with schoolyard bullies,
mm,
right? If you can joke about yourself, they lose the power.
yeah,
Yeah, right. Uh-huh. I can't see that. Ha ha ha. Yeah, right. I am a nerd. Whatever. Like, it's a great comparison,
yeah,
and that goes whether that spans so much more than OCD or my vision or whatever. That's something that's almost universal, right? But it's the same thing with OCD. If you're aggressing it, give me these thoughts. Let me kind of blow them up and take them to the OCD. You're telling me my house is going to burn down? Yeah, it's going to burn down. I'm going to burn down the neighborhood and then the whole world. Like, blow it up. You're taking the power away from OCD or from self doubt or from shame or um, from other people or fear of rejection. It's incredible.
yeah,
Yeah. Now I
yeah.
want to go back and watch 8 Mile, but I think that's spot on.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I watched it 3 times when it came out in the cinema.
Did you? It's
I
been a while since I've seen
was
it.
in my
Yeah.
rap days. Um,
Love some 90s hip hop.
yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, and I think there was another point I wanted to highlight actually, which I think is a kind of a teachable moment, which is a phrase I heard the other day. Is that you said you don't know if eventually you could go blind or not. The uncertainty's still there, and obviously I
Mhm.
hope that you don't.
It would be
But
ideal.
yeah, yeah, I know I'm sure you hope. Um, but the thing is, let's say the worst case happened, and it did happen. If you spent, and let's say it was in 10 years' time, you spent the last 10, 15 years worrying, overthinking it, living in uncertainty in a not in a good way,
Right.
you then look, I also wasted the 15 years I had sight.
Exactly.
Whereas instead of kind of saying, well, I don't know the uncertainty, but I'm going to go all out, until whatever happens or doesn't happen. And then if it does happen, you can say, well, I lived the best I could and I'm happy about that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So there are a couple things on that. Is one, I definitely part of my personal journey is I started reading self-help books, and
Yeah.
the scholar in me and the scientist practitioner cringed. What are you reading these pop psychology things? Oh my gosh, my colleagues are going to judge me. But as I'm reading Tony Robbins and
Yeah.
Tim Ferriss and some of these, it's all CBT and ACT,
Yeah.
just put in lay people terms, but it's also inspiring. So kind of that we have to not only do your ERP, but I think we have to boost our motivation every day. That's been helpful for me. And then I am taking charge. I've always wanted to see the Northern Lights. I booked a trip to Iceland in February because why not now?
Yeah.
Right? I know I can see them now. So by golly, I'm going to go. Maybe I can see them in 10 years, maybe I can't. But it is sort of this, I want to take ownership of my life and I want to use my time in a meaningful way. And I had some mentor, 10 years ago, I don't remember exactly who it was, say, all right, look, there's kind of two paths in life. Can we all agree we're going to die? Like at the end of this life, we're going to die. So path A is I can worry, 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 maybe have a little fun, worry some more, do some stuff, worry, 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 and then die.
Yeah.
Or I can do stuff, have some fun, have relationships, worry a little bit because that's part of life, but do stuff and then die. Which one do you want to use? Or, which one do you want? Choice B, absolutely. And that is something, I mean, I very candidly say in the therapy room too, is like, here are your options. What do you want to do? So we have the option to embrace uncertainty. There's nothing I can do to figure out whether I'm going to go blind or not. Just like there's nothing you can do to get that certainty OCD is looking for. Like, it doesn't exist, so why bother? So I cut those thoughts off at the pass of, okay, well, if I'm going to start to go down this path, and then you get, what am I going to do if I go blind? I don't know. I'm going to cross that bridge when I get there. And in the meantime, I'm focusing on what's going to bring daily joy for me, what gives me meaning and purpose, and how can I share that with other people? Because that is something that gives me happiness and meaning and purpose. And how can I use my CBT skills to my advantage, and do that? And with that, I'm also building confidence in myself. Like, I have every step of the way, I've been able to rise to the occasion. And my personal motto is adapt and conquer. And that's what I'm going to do, adapt and conquer. And I think that's what we all have to do, regardless of kind of what we're given. Kind of side story, I'm going to tell you how Facebook changed my life. It's a short story, but there was this meme that I saw, and it was, just because life gives you a cactus doesn't mean you have to sit on it. And I take that to me, all like the sitting on it part, that's all of the in our head stuff.
Yeah.
So if you have OCD, great, there's your cactus. Don't sit on it. Do what you need to do. My vision is mine. All right, great. I'm going to do what I need to do. I'm not going to sit on the thing anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love that. And the whole self-help thing, I mean, that's, yes, I mean, self-help changed my life when I was 18. I must have told this story on the podcast before. I always struggled academically as a kid, you know, at GCSE level, which is at the age of 16. I got 3 C's and the rest like D's, E's, F's and fails. I then went to sixth form, which is 16 to 18, which would be high school for you guys. And I got 2 E's and a D there. I had to write a letter to get into university because I didn't have the grades, pretty much begging. And I'm unashamed because I did what I needed to be successful. I'm not ashamed about that. But and basically at the age of 18, I was like, something needs to change. This can't go on. I feel like I deserve bigger than this. I feel like I'm better than this, not in an arrogant way, but just beyond what I was.
More life. Yeah.
Exactly. And I just picked up a book which was called Be Your Own Life Coach by Fiona Harold, who's she's Irish actually, Northern Irish life coach, lives in London now. And that book, although I've reread it since and it's very basic, back then it blew my mind. Like, she told me I could be anything I wanted to be. And no one had ever told me that. Whenever I said I wanted to do something, whether it was like an fighter pilot, let's say when I was a kid, it would be like, oh, you need to be really smart for that, or you need perfect eyesight, or you need, what was the other one I got with that one? There was another reason I got, and all these limitations, all by well-meaning people, were just trying to like not let me get hurt. But what that did was keep a very tight lid on me. And it's the self-helps, I mean, helped me massively. And since then, you know, I just got a distinction for a master's in psychology. You know? And then at the age of 16, I was told I couldn't study psychology because I would struggle. I mean, that's a joke. Like,
but that's a belief, right?
Oh, yeah.
I can't do it. To take Tony Robbins' word, it's a limiting belief. Yeah. Okay, to take Ellison Beck, it's a distorted cognition. But belief plus action equals more belief. And if we kind of learn that of like, oh, this is just a belief, whether it came from inside or outside, right? Like messages from the outer world, you can change them. You can override them. You can do things. And I think that's incredibly freeing. And I am letting go of some of those like elitist CBT, academic attitudes and saying, all right, but how can we take it? Again, CBT is not rocket science. We would all, and I don't mean that to like put it down in any way, but to say, this is stuff we could all benefit from. How do we know in the field dissemination is an issue. That's back to the barriers. What's a barrier? Finding a CBT therapist. Okay, well, how can we open the doors and say, well, here are the principles of ERP. Here are the principles of ACT. Here's what to do. Like, take charge of your life and your symptoms and your health. And and there are different ways to do it. And I think this particular time in the world is incredibly exciting because we have technology. I mean, you and I are talking from across the ocean to put this information out there for anybody who's willing to listen. And that's an incredible thing to do and to be a part of. So I'm getting all fired up. This is good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And the whole now, if I ever feel that, I don't know, I lack confidence or I lack resiliency or I
Hmm.
don't know, or something, I don't buy that anymore. What I lack is information.
Yeah.
So I will go to a book and I will read a book where someone has done it before me, whatever it is, whether it's an
Hmm.
emotion or a character trait or whether it's an activity. I'll find someone who's done it, and that gives me the whole idea of success leaves clues.
Hmm.
Um, just find someone who's been successful, and you've got a blueprint, and anyone can follow a blueprint.
Yeah.
Will I ever be a world-class singer? I very much doubt it, because I would call myself tone deaf, but
Fair.
I know that if I seek the right knowledge, I sought the right teacher, kind of a Tim Ferriss approach, I
Hmm.
would I would probably be able to get to a point where I could go to a karaoke bar and people wouldn't cover their ears. Like,
Fair enough.
so I believe, I can improve in anything, and obviously some things I have more of a natural ability and I might improve even further. But
Right.
there's always a way, and again, Tony Robbins says you don't lack resources, you lack resourcefulness, which
Yep.
I think is a tough love message, but I think it's an empowering one if you embrace it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's looking at like what are the excuses, the thoughts that get in our way?
Mm.
I can't do that. Well, okay, underlying any anxiety disorder is a overestimation of how bad it's going to be. It's going to be
Yeah.
horrible and an underestimation of your ability to handle it. You can't handle it. Can't shuts us down. So I think one of
Mm.
the best things we could do is just get away from I can't. Like that's a red flag in my head. How can I?
Yeah.
And that opens the door to just be thinking. It puts you on a different path. So
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a book called Rich Dad Poor Dad,
that's where
which
I got that from.
I was just about to
100%.
say
That's
that.
where I
Yeah,
got it from. Yeah.
yeah,
It's a good book.
yeah. He says, I
Isn't it?
can't afford this. And he says, change the question to, how can I afford this? And then your brain starts thinking, as you
Exactly.
said. Yeah,
And I read that book to learn about finances, but as I'm reading it,
yeah,
I'm going, this is CBT and ACT. This is CBT and ACT applied to money.
yeah.
So the whole world kind of operates on these terms. So that's been really cool for me. So whether it's OCD or depression
Mm.
or disability or money or career choices or relationships, there are these principles that I think really span. And it's awesome. This is where I could nerd out for hours.
Yeah,
It's cool stuff.
absolutely. And I'm wary of my listeners in case many of them don't like self-help, or I call it self-improvement, but that's just my own take on it, because I find help sounds victimized, whereas improvement is like I'm seeking to improve myself. Because the only reason I did that as a young age, because I got a lot of flack from people when I was
Hmm.
18, 20, and I said I'm reading all this because I want to improve myself and live a great life. I got a lot of shit, for want of a better word, from people,
Right.
certain people.
Yeah.
Um, so I changed it to self-improvement because it made me feel less of a victim.
I
Although,
like that.
yeah.
Yeah, it's language matters, but it's also there are even in the anxiety treatment world to address this issue of dissemination,
Mm.
people are looking at bibliotherapy. Here's this,
Yeah.
basically it's a self-improvement guide. It's a book for parents and caregivers, a books for people with OCD. Okay, it's the same thing. Take this and does it improve symptoms? And there's encouraging data coming out.
Mm.
And maybe there are some people who can do it. There are some who can't, who need more guidance.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. But I think we have to look at bridging the gap and maybe for milder situations or people who don't have access to specialty care. Here's this other way.
Mm.
And I think why not use other ways and why not think creatively? And, honestly, our therapy model in general is still based on, antiquated models, Freudian models of once a week, 45 to 50 minutes. And the exposure world is changing that a little bit by doing extended sessions. And
Yeah.
people are kind of embracing that a little bit more, or out of the office sessions to go do exposures driving down the highway or in the home or in public. And that's great. But it's murky territory of, okay, how can we use these things to make sure that we're still providing good care and evidence-based things, but why not use these new tools and as a field adapt and conquer to move forward and help more people who are struggling.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, with technology as well, I think, yeah, we need to find ways to reach more people sooner and faster.
Absolutely.
So people aren't waiting as long.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Actually, one thing I will say, we just mentioned the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, anyone who wants to improve their finances, wholeheartedly read that book.
Mm-hmm.
It's life-changing. It was for me anyway.
Me too.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great read. It reads like a fiction.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So one thing I read on your blog, ablindquest.com, which I loved, which was the post is called A Year of New Experiences.
Yeah.
I've been part of my kind of self-help journey has been doing these like 30-day challenges, and at the minute I'm doing a year of no alcohol, which I love. And I guess I wanted to get your take on this year of new experiences, why you did it, how it's benefited you, and I guess some of the experiences.
Yeah, this has been fun. So it started as a New Year's resolution. It sort of happened accidentally. So the very first one was that you can make, if you create static electricity, like in your hair under the blankets, you can see the sparks fly. And I found that fascinating. Here I was at 36 going, holy cow, this is amazing. How did I not know this was a thing? Okay, but then that somehow led me to thinking, well, there's probably a lot of other new experiences out there, and that's going to be my New Year's resolution. And as a person, I know about myself, I do better when I have things to look forward to. I tend to be pretty open to trying things, and I enjoy that. So I decided to be a little more intentional about it. So that the post that's up was the first half of the year, and I've continued it, and I journal in my phone as I'm doing these things. So part 2 will be up in January. I've got 3 weeks left, and it's been fun. And having it as this goal and having the blog to keep me accountable, because that was in my mind. Well, I'm going to make this a post. This is going to be cool. I don't care if anybody else thinks this is cool. I'm having fun with it. Kept me on track with it. And to be perfectly honest, some weeks I totally dialed it in and didn't really approach it from this intentional perspective. But some of the coolest ones that I've had, sitting on the edge of the Grand Canyon, when I really think about that, it still makes my stomach flip. It was terrifying. And I did it because I'm sitting there like, I'm not venturing down to the edge. Are you kidding? That's a mile drop. Like, people don't fly. I'm scared, and I'm supposed to be scared. And the other part of me is, all right, well, you teach people every day to face their fear. So buck up, Buttercup. You got to do this. So I did. And I'm so great. It was so exhilarating. So that was amazing. More recently, I tried this experience called floating. And it's basically a sensory deprivation.
Yeah, I really want to try that.
It was amazing. Try it. It. It was a recommendation from a friend. And we have I didn't even know we had that option here. I'm in Kansas City, Missouri. And it was this really serene, peaceful, you get into this little chamber. I mean, it's big enough for me to stand up in, and you just float in this salt water that's so salty, you float it without trying, and it's pitch black and it's perfectly silent. And it was an incredible way to just be. So I'm really curious for people to try it. I'm hesitant to recommend it to patients because it's not evidence-based, but I'm so dying for other people to try it and tell me what happened. Because for me, it was this kind of cool way to meditate, to be mindful, to just let my mind go. And I want to know what happens for other people. So that was incredible. And then I've had some other things. I saw some Tibetan monks chant and had a chance to talk with a Tibetan monk about happiness, and his advice was very consistent with kind of the CBT ACT philosophy of thought's just a thought. Observe it and move on. And I'm like, okay, all these kind of core truths. Yeah. And I went to Alaska. That was amazing. Hiked on a glacier. So it's been really cool. And that's been part of what's inspired me to take more charge of life and to do some things and to take some risks personally and professionally. So it's been fun. It's a lifestyle change that I'm going to keep up. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it's been super cool.
No, that's awesome to hear. And I think that's a good, I mean, people could obviously model that, like, you know, as we were talking earlier about ACT and like living by your values and trying to focus your time more on something more positive or constructive and setting a year of challenges. And it doesn't have to be anything big. It could be like you did the first week with your hair and the sparks.
Yeah.
It could be there's I don't know, like a park near where you live that you just haven't gone to or haven't gone to in 10 years. Well, no, that's probably not new, but you had never gone to.
Exactly.
So go check that out. Or just things you can quickly add in, but it adds something in your calendar each week that is slightly different and forces you to go and do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to think about, I mean, last week, or I guess this week's, I roasted a whole chicken. That's not life-changing. Most people have done that, but I've been intimidated by it. So I tried it. Meh. Didn't love it, but there we go. It was something new and it had me like, I had to think about it. So it's been a lot of fun. A lot of fun.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Big fan of challenges.
Yeah.
I find I'm quite lazy otherwise if I don't set things like that.
Exactly.
So it motivates me to do it.
Exactly. I like the 30-day challenge thing, and I did no TV November. So that'll be a post soon, just what that's. I realized I was watching a lot of TV. I have this giant, amazing TV. It's like a perk of not seeing well, right? I got the biggest screen possible. And then you've got Netflix that just pulls you in. So, yeah. And so I was realizing like, oh my gosh, I'm spending like, what would I do if I didn't spend all this time on Netflix? So I did it as a 30-day challenge. And now we're a week into December and I still haven't watched TV. So it's been interesting, easier than I thought in a lot of ways. And I've done some stuff that I wouldn't have normally done. So
well, that's interesting because, not watching TV has really been on my mind recently. Like December's really busy for me. January's going to be busy. So it's kind of like every time I watch TV, as much as I love watching Netflix, part of me is like, my life would be so much more rewarding if I didn't watch this.
Yeah. Try it.
Yeah. It's that thing because some people, they can it's the same with like sweets or candy. Like some people can have a bag in their kitchen and have the odd one or two here and there. I can't do that. If there's a bag there, it's gone in a minute. If I've got a Netflix subscription, I'm watching every box that they have. So that's where I really struggle. So sometimes these challenges help me kind of take stock.
And it's easier. It's a mental trick, right? Like boosting motivation or translating things from this is what I know I should do to actually being able to do it. You can do anything for 30 days. Yeah. Now, indefinitely, no, I give up, right? But 30 days, sure, that makes it more manageable.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I've got sort of 4 questions here at the end. You're in an elevator with someone who has OCD. They've told you that because they've heard you on this podcast. And they ask for your advice. What advice do you tell them?
Ooh, short advice?
Well, yeah, you're only going up, say, 8 stories.
Okay, so I tell them there is hope. This is treatable. Amazing people. Look, amazing people have OCD and they overcome it and they lead amazing lives because I think having hope is one of the most important first steps. I give them my card and say, if you need to be pointed in the right direction, let me know. I'm happy to do that. Go to the International OCD Foundation. It's a great website. Anything linked on there is going to be credible. Find some books. Yep. That would be my elevator pitch.
Great. The OCD Stories is linked on the ISDF website. So
see, there we go. It seems like it's a good hub to like get to good books and good resources and motivational stories. So, yeah. Yeah,
cool. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you've got a billboard in Kansas City. What do you want written on the billboard for the world to see? And it doesn't have to be OCD related.
I really like that just because life gives you a cactus doesn't mean you have to sit on it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Maybe a nice illustration as well to go with it.
Yeah. That's what I would do.
Okay, great. And then this was the amazing life question, but after episode 99, where Dr. Stephen Phillipson questioned me on the term amazing, I'm changing it because it is loaded, but I don't mean it in the way I think most people use the word amazing. But I'm going to call it the meaningful life question. What advice do you have for people to live a meaningful life?
Oh, that's the quest I'm on. I'm trying to answer that question, period. I think in this like quest for happiness that I've been on, I think there are two key pieces that we really need. We need stimulation. So you have to continue to learn and grow as a person.
Yeah.
Seek out books, seek out things, be an active consumer, not a passive consumer of information. You can learn anything on the world thanks to YouTube now. So it's there. You have to continue to seek it out, or you're going to just get passive and kind of float through life. Yeah. The other piece is connection. One of the I haven't written about this yet on my blog, but it will at some point. I think loneliness is that in the positive psych world, they're saying there's a loneliness epidemic right now. We are lonely, even though we're more connected through technology, we are lonelier, but we're not alone in that. And I've struggled with that too. And one of the things that I have found the most incredible is just to core belief. Everybody I meet is a potential connection. So I talk to people in the elevator. I talk to people on the streetcar. I talk to people who look different than I do, from different walks of life. And it may not be anything meaningful. It might just be a, hey, how are you? But the more you can connect, there is more that we share than divides us. And that's something that I find helps me feel happier, more connected, and more a part of this world. And so stimulation and connection.
Yeah.
And along that way, you'll find your calling or your meaning. I'm still not sure what my calling is, but I think those are the two pieces we need for a meaningful life.
Yeah. Okay, great. No, I love it. Yeah, completely agree. And talking to strangers is something I would love to do, and it's something I feel I will work on in the coming years. But I have my own roadblocks to get past that.
Oh, I will tell you, as a teenager, it's kind of, I sort of fell into the world of social anxiety research, but then there's this whole saying in psychology, it's not research, it's me-search. Looking back, I was socially anxious as a teenager, and I can confidently say it's been exposure, it's been CBT, sort of in this like accidental way that there's not a social anxious bone in my body at this point. But I wasn't naturally this way. I really had to, it worked. And it works when you kind of challenge those and you put yourself out there. Stretch a little bit, it gets a whole lot easier.
All right, great. Well, I'm going to the shop in a minute, so I'll ask the cashier how they are.
Perfect. Yes, do it. It gets easier.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing. I used to do it, but again, if you stop doing it, you, as you say, anxiety grows. And
yeah. There's a TED Talk, and I think it's called it's either 100 Days of Rejection or Rejection Therapy. It's fantastic, and it's all CBT.
Yeah.
So, but it's very cool what this guy did to overcome his own social anxiety.
Oh, cool. I'll check it.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And then lastly is is there anything else that you'd like to talk about that I haven't asked you or that you want to share? I
think we have covered so much stuff. It's been a really fun conversation. I appreciate the time.
Yeah. So. No, I appreciate it. And thank you for coming on. You've shared some valuable advice. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Dr. Ashley Smith. But here's a quick disclaimer. This podcast is not therapy, nor should it be. Please seek treatment from a trained professional. Have a good week, and I will see you next time.